Our next speaker is the product owner of Python at Heroku and a member of the Python Software Foundation. He's well known for his many open source projects, including requests, and is also known for presenting one of the keynote speeches at last year's PyCon Australia here in Hobart. This year he's sharing his experiences in starting and growing open source communities. Please welcome Kenneth Reitz.
Thank you, everybody. Can you guys hear me all right? Excellent. Cool. All right. Let's see. So, hello, everybody. My name is Kenneth Reitz. If you'd like to, you can follow me on Twitter at Kenneth Reitz. And if you know who I am, it's likely from my GitHub repo, or my GitHub profile, I should say. I maintain quite a few open source projects and spend a lot of my free time doing that. There's about 18 serious projects on there and a lot of experiments. Probably my most used library or project is OSX GCC installer, which allows you to install Xcode on, or GCC on your Mac without using Xcode, because that's the worst thing in the world, having to install Xcode every time you want to set up a new Mac. And requests, which is quite popular. I have some other interests. I enjoy street photography. I get to travel all over the world to speak at conferences like this place, and it's great because I get to go out into the cities and document the people that live there, which is really fun. I also enjoy synthesizers and video games and stuff like that, so if you want to chat with me about that later, please do. I also work for a company called Heroku, who flew me out here, and we're sponsors at the conference. And basically what we are is a really great platform for deploying Python web applications, as well as web applications written in other languages. And so if you have any questions about that, and we're also hiring at the moment, so you can come talk to me or Jacob afterwards, or Reese, and we'd love to chat more about that. I'm also a member of the Python Software Foundation, which is an excellent organization, and we will also be changing our membership style soon, so more people will be able to become a member through association. So keep your eye out for that. It'd be really great. But I'm going to open this talk with a little bit of a story. Who here uses Facebook? A lot of people. So once upon a time, Facebook released this project called the Facebook SDK. It was a Python library. It was available on their GitHub repo. I believe it was also in the Cheese Shop. And it was the #1 supported official way to access the Facebook APIs from Python. And Facebook on a very regular basis tells everyone about how much they love the developers, and they try to encourage and foster people building apps on their platform, because that's mostly what their business is getting people to run apps on their platform. And what happened is that one day, basically, the API changed so much that this library stopped functioning completely. So a lot of people started opening issues. You know, there was one in particular that got really high up on Hacker News, and it had over 100 comments of people complaining about this problem, and there was just no word from Facebook at all. It was horrible. Does anybody remember this? Okay. So basically, what happened was Facebook's response to this problem, instead of hiring someone to solve this problem or get someone to work on this, something that they claim is one of their most important values, instead they just disabled the issue tracker on the GitHub repo, so there were no more visible issues, and problem solved. It's basically the worst possible scenario that could have possibly happened. And this was a open source library. It had an open license, and but really it wasn't open source at all. The open source that we all know and love is about community and fostering development, distributed development all over the world, and for the better of mankind. And this is the opposite of that, basically. So this isn't really open source. This is what I like to call a public source project. So basically what a public source project is an organization will basically, they'll throw together some code, and it's better than, say, keeping it closed source. They like the idea of, well, if this has no proprietary code in it, or if it's useful to other developers, we'll throw it on our GitHub repo and maybe other people will use it. But what happens is these companies often abandon these projects because there's a lack of interest or burnout, change of focus. The one intern that they had working on this project, maybe it doesn't work there anymore. No one even knows who owns it, and who knows what department is actually maintaining it. And unfortunately, this happens all the time. And the worst part about this is that the motivations behind the project are unclear. Are they trying to, Are they trying to take advantage of the development community by giving them this piece of code, or are they trying to do the opposite where they're trying to foster their user base? So that's one side of the spectrum of the open source world. If you go to the other side, there's a project called GitTip, which is basically the polar opposite of a public source project. So is anyone here, who here has used GitTip? Just so I know. Excellent. More people should use it because I believe they support international payouts now. Before it was an American-only system for getting money in and out, so I suggest you guys go check it out. Basically what it is it's a way for sustainable crowdfunding, basically. You can go to a developer that you like their code, and then you can say, I want to give them $1, $10 a week, or any amount between, I think, 0 and 100 now, dollars. And instead of it being a one-time micropayment, which is not very sustainable, this is on a weekly basis. And the goal is to eventually have enough people and enough money in the system where that people can use this as like their full-time employee, basically. And this project is really cool because remember this guy named Chad Whitaker, and he basically takes open source to the absolute extreme. And he's trying to run what is called the world's first open company. So basically, whenever someone tweets at him or something and complains like, oh, I wish it did this, I wish it did that, immediately what he does is he goes and he opens a GitHub issue about the problem. And then usually he'll tweet about it so other people can comment on it. And all the major decisions for both the company, like financial decisions or otherwise security issues, they're all voted for on GitHub normally, which is really great. So he actually got in trouble recently, kind of, not in trouble, but it was controversial because TechCrunch wanted to have an interview with him about the project. And what happened was they didn't, he live streams basically all of his interviews with journalists because it's an open source project. He wants everyone to be able to see all of the conversations that occur around the project. And TechCrunch wasn't very comfortable with that. So of course all these other organizations ate that up, and we're running all these stories about how TechCrunch is against open source and everything. It was pretty awesome. But it works out really well. So all formal discussions with other groups are publicly documented and shared. So if you're a company and you want to partner with GitTip, basically it's only an option if it's a public partnership. And Chad is famous for saying, I'm not building GitTip, I'm building the community that is building GitTip. This project isn't about him, it's about building something that's greater than himself or than the people that are a part of it. So projects like GitTip I call shared investment projects. They're the opposite of a public project, a public source project where the code is just slapped up there and it's open source. This is really about having a shared investment in something to make it for the greater good. There's shared ownership, there's shared transparency. New contributors can get involved by following a very simple documented process usually. And it's very low risk because there's a high bus factor. If Chad gets hit by a bus, every single decision and all the philosophies behind the project are accessible on GitHub basically. And that works out really well. Some other projects kind of run in a similar way, not quite to that same extreme, but Python itself, Django, Firefox, jQuery, these are all things that don't have like a single owner. They are very much a shared investment. They are aiming to change the world, and that's not possible if one person is basically in control of everything. So I run a project called Requests, which is HTTP for humans. Basically, it's very difficult to do HTTP in Python by default with the standard library. So I wrote a library to make it very simple to do. And a lot of people really like it. And basically, this is a very popular open source project. I've had like over 100 developers contribute code to it. Very open to contributions from other people. And many people consider it to be a good example of a great open source project. But it's a very different style project from GitTip, from Django, from jQuery, from Python. Basically, zero of the project's decisions are made by the community, and they're all made by me, which is a very, very different way of doing things. So I like to call this, it's somewhere between a public source and a shared investment project, and I call it a dictatorship project. So basically what a dictatorship project is it's at the front of the project you have a totalitarian BDFL that basically owns everything related to the project. They're responsible for all the decisions, and community feedback is really encouraged. Lots of people can get involved, but the users with the feedback shouldn't have any expectation that change is going to happen. Like if they come to me with a specific thing that they want to happen, if it doesn't fit into the scope of what I believe requests should be doing, then it's not going to happen. And some people like that, some people don't. But basically, the way I like to approach this is it's considering the open source project more of a product, and it needs a lot more attention to detail than a crowdsourced project could be. It's the tragedy of the commons. So request value really lies in its extreme opinions, and with very few people involved at the core of the decision-making process, it allows for really quick, precise iterations, and I don't have to explain all the decisions that I'm making all the time, which is really nice. But at the same time, that wouldn't really work for a project like Python. Because those opinions could be diluted if more people were involved in the decision-making process. Of course, there are some downsides to this approach as well. The buzz factor is extremely low, so when I go home tomorrow, if my plane crashes, it'll be very unclear what the process is to maintain the project after that. No, not flying LAX, so the chances I'll be in a crash are probably greater. And the risk of burnout is extremely high, so I'm like the central point of failure. If I'm not in the mood to maintain the project, then it's not going to get maintained. So I've learned a couple of things to kind of figure out how to make that more sustainable. Because sustainability is the most important part of any open source project. The first and the most important one is to be cordial or be on your way. This is extremely important. Basically, all interactions if you're a contributor to a project, it's very important that you keep all interactions with the maintainer as absolutely respectful as possible. Basically, they have spent a lot of time creating something that other people can use, and they put a lot of time and energy into the project, so you shouldn't act like they owe you any of their time. But at the same time, they should be as cordial to you as possible as well. If you're a maintainer of a project, you have a crucial responsibility of being immensely thankful to all of your contributors. And I think this is a problem that a lot of people that run a lot of projects have. Someone will open an issue or a pull request, and they'll be kind of ambiguous, or it's not a good pull request, and they'll just close it, and they'll be like, this sucks, I'm not going to respond to you, I'm not going to be nice to you. There's this default hostile environment, and it's a horrible, toxic thing that should be tried to be eliminated if at all possible. Basically, your contributors and the users of your project are the lifeblood of your project. So, if someone gives you non-constructive feedback, which happens all the time, it's really important just to ignore that. Don't try to take it too personally. Don't try to get caught up in the negativity that's being risen from that. But be really encouraging to new contributors. And you have to realize that a lot of people take code way, way, way too seriously, basically. So to do this, I think it's really important to be very careful with the words that you choose. Contributors sometimes will take what you say very, very personally. So a lot of people kind of go along the side of you should be judging a pull request or a contribution purely on the code, and if it's not good, you should tear it apart. And I kind of do the opposite of that, basically, where I try to be as encouraging and uplifting as possible, because these people have taken time out of their day to work on a piece of code that I've, on my project. That's amazing. I can't believe that someone would do that. So you should be immensely thankful to these people, because your project would be useless without them. So if they do something that's not really in line normally, like they just say, this doesn't work in a pull request, in a GitHub issue, you can take the opportunity to educate the user instead of brandishing them, basically. So usually it's really great to have good documentation around all the different aspects of your project, like here's what we kind of expect around a pull request or around an issue, like it needs to have tests. And then instead of just yelling at them like this doesn't have tests, you can kindly point them in the right direction, kind of show them that, hey, there's information, there's resources for this to help get them to the next step. And something that happens surprisingly often in the Python world, at least for my projects, is oftentimes someone will just have some kind of weird issue, and I'll help them out and kind of go the extra mile of being cordial, and then they'll come to me later and they'll tell me that that was their first contribution ever in open source. And that could happen, this probably happens with projects all the time, and if you're negative towards that person, that could scare them away from doing open source forever, which would be a horrible thing, and I think this happens every day. So as a maintainer of a project, you have a huge responsibility to try to foster and educate people. And a little bit of kindness really goes a long way. So for maintaining requests as well, I've learned a couple of things to avoid burnout, because it's very, very easy to get burned out, especially when a project is popular and it has a lot of users that are constantly bothering you about 1,000 things. Basically, sustainability is the most important challenges of any open source project. People are taking time out of their day. It's a distributed system. People, if it's, it needs to be sustainable. They need to have a set amount of time to be able to contribute to the project, and spreading that around makes that a little bit easier because everyone has a limited amount of time. And unfortunately, it's very easy to become the bottleneck for your own projects. So this is a quote by a coworker of mine, Wes. He maintains a very popular library for Ruby called Fog, which is kind of like libcloud for Ruby, basically. And it goes like this. Open source provides a unique opportunity for the trifecta of purpose, mastery, and autonomy. By recognizing the power of these factors, we can keep ourselves motivated and continue to increase our impact. So making the world a better place by grasping all the different aspects of open source and not just focusing on code or not just focusing on process. So these guys are people that help me out with my projects, and these guys are amazing, and they are basically the reason I haven't been burned out. It's Corey and Ian. I recommend you follow these guys or something because they are like seriously the best contributors on planet Earth. They're amazing. And basically, what I've had to learn to do while maintaining these projects is learn how to do less. And these guys allow me to do that. So when an issue or a pull request comes into the repo, these guys are usually the first people to respond to it now. Normally I'm like at a conference, I'm speaking, and I'll get back home, I'll have like 45 issues and pull requests to review, and it's like this big, long, laborious process. But these guys triage all the issues for me. So they will be like the first person to respond. They'll help people improve the code. They'll try to educate the user, or recommend that it gets merged at any time. And this saves me an immense amount of time, and they get to learn a lot about maintaining their project in the process. So I get to focus my time on the larger, more pressing issues in the project instead of a lot of these little small things. And they help the contributors make the best time of their efforts. So it's really a win-win situation. Here's a quote from Corey that he did one day. He said, "As I fork another of his projects, it occurs to me that I don't program in the Python ecosystem, I program in the Kenneth Wrights ecosystem." This is a bit silly, but it's very rewarding to see him say something like that, because really what it does is it shows me that if you try to foster your contributors, try to foster your users, basically there's no bad thing that can happen. It is all good, positive things that are happening. He is going to, he gets involved in the other projects that I work on and other projects that are kind of related to requests, like OAuth lib, for example, for OAuth. He's very involved in that, and it kind of spreads, and it's really great. This is the most important thing that I've learned while maintaining my projects, and it is to learn how to say no. No is basically the most difficult thing to learn how to say. People are going to come to you and they're going to ask for the most ridiculous features in the world. I have been absolutely astonished at the things people have asked for. Like for a request, people wanted it so if it would return an HTML, like if you're getting an HTML response, it would like automatically give you a DOM tree instead of the content, basically, and crazy things like that. XML parsing and XPath support and all these things that make sense for these, for that use case, but not at all for the core project. These are people that are trying to help the project or trying to make it better for them. But really, it takes someone that has more of a bigger picture approach to realize what's good and bad. So if you say yes very often, you'll find, and this happens with a lot of projects, your project will very slowly and systematically be destroyed. And this is also known as the tragedy of the commons. There's this great guy named Peter Hitchens. He is the CEO, I believe, of ZeroMQ, which turns out to be a company as well as an open source project. He's a pretty cool guy. And he's well known for saying simplicity is always better than functionality. And that's something that I try to put into all the projects that I maintain. I'd say that this is definitely something that's stylistic. I don't think every project needs to be as simple as possible. But for my projects, that's what I try to do. And if you go down that route of trying to support every user's use case, I like to encourage people to focus on the 90% use case and not the 100% use case. If there's something that's going to make the project harder to use for for 90% of your users to support 10 of them, then it's probably not a good thing that you should be adding. So basically, if a new pull request comes in and it adds some nice features, but adds complexity, more difficult things to maintain, something that a maintainer doesn't necessarily understand, it's a good idea to say no to that feature, regardless of how useful it is. A good example for this, for me, is like Kerberos authentication used to be built in, and I have no idea how that works. Neither does anyone else who maintains the project. So it would break all the time. We didn't have any tests for it. It was horrible. So this, learning how to say no to this feature kind of encouraged us to start thinking about things in a different way, and we made a more pluggable modular system so someone else could write their own library and maintain it, and just kind of pass it in as an argument, and everybody wins. Kind of teaches you to make things more modular, and that's what open source is all about. And I try to make basically as few lines of code as possible in all my projects. Simple code is a really great thing. It makes things a lot easier to maintain. Code solves problems normally that are created by humans, not machines. So if you are always bending over for the machines, then your code is going to end up being really complicated. It's not good. Negative diffs are the best diffs in a pull request, and it kind of encourages you to build these sharp, small distributed services and modules and pluggable architectures, things that everyone kind of agrees are good things. Complex code can be basically the worst thing in the world. If you look at a lot of projects that people kind of regret and they have a big weight on their shoulder when they're talking about it, their maintainer hates himself, it's often because the code is very complex and monolithic. These kind of code bases really encourage tight coupling of different services and different components. Can have lurking and growing technical debt, can be very difficult to maintain, especially if it's only one person maintaining the project, and that can be extremely horrible. And this leads to the project being a self-serving project instead of a problem-solving project, and no one likes that. So, learn to say no to all the things. Open source makes the world a better place. Please don't make it complicated. And that's everything. Does anybody have any questions?
Hi, thanks for the talk.
Thank you.
We sometimes see news about big projects being forked into two communities. Now, is that ever a good thing, do you think? Is it something that needs to happen?
I think it can absolutely be a good thing, but it depends on a lot of things. The best example that I always use is Hudson being forked into Jenkins, when really it was actually the opposite happening. So basically are you familiar with the story, basically?
Yeah, I only used it after it became Jenkins.
Yeah. So there was this Hudson project, and then Sun was bought by Oracle, and it was a Sun project. And basically, one day, Oracle just kind of came into their boardroom basically on IRC and was like, "You guys aren't running this anymore. This is our project." And they're like, "You can't do that." And they're like, "Yes, you can. We have the trademark on the name." So Oracle's story is that the community forked the project, and it's like this reckless abandonment thing. But really, if you talk to the Jenkins maintainers, the people who created the project, what happened was the community decided to change their name, and Oracle forked the project and continuing on the old brand, which was a very bad thing. So I'd say that in that case, the forking of the project was definitely, absolutely required, and it was a great thing. But that was definitely a very political thing, right? So are you talking about more the idea of someone has a code base and they don't like it, so they just kind of fork it instead of contributing? That's kind of the thing that I see happen a lot.
Right.
Yeah, that's usually not as good, but it depends. It depends on the maintainer. The worst thing is when someone forks your project and they don't talk to you about it first. Or they go in on a big rant or they write a blog post complaining about all these problems, and they never discussed it with the maintainers. So I think that if you discuss things first, that it can solve a lot of those problems, personally.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So with your contributors to requests, do they actually have write access to your code, or is that still held by you?
But for Ian and Corey, yeah, they have full access on GitHub. And basically what the kind of the policy is that they typically don't make any changes to the code base. When there's a pull request or anything, they'll close a lot of issues, things like that, and they'll like tell me what's ready to merge. And I'm kind of encouraging them to start merging the small things that are very obvious, but they're still figuring that out.
And so did you work with them to sort of help them understand your sort of vision for the project or so forth, or they were able to pick it up as it goes along?
Can you say that one more time?
Sorry, yeah. So did you work with them to sort of help them understand
Yes.
your vision for the project, as it were?
Well, that's the really interesting thing that happened that surprised me is that basically like one day I just saw one of these two people just kind of like closing, like telling me a bunch of issues needed to be closed because they were old or they had already been fixed. All these kind of like house cleaning things that I was really bad at. And so I just added them as contributors one day, and I said, hey guys, don't make any changes to the code base, but I'd really love if you guys would, you guys are doing great, so I want to encourage that. And then slowly over time what happened was like one of them, like there'll be an issue that comes in, and they'll agree that it should be in, but they know that I won't like it, so they'll say that basically, which is super cool. They'll be like, I don't think Kenneth is going to like this, but here's the reasons why maybe he should like it. And it works out really well. And I feel like I don't know how to repeat that. I think of just kind of because they're amazing. But I think maybe just trying to be as fostering and encouraging as possible ideally would encourage that behavior.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a tendency at the moment to encourage people to do things on behalf of other entities? So organizations wanting people to like things on Facebook, gamification by thanking people publicly for things. Do you think there's a tendency for open source projects that make a big deal out of contributions to kind of poison their user base by stopping it from being about contributing and being about getting the recognition for contribution? Say GitTip. If GitTip made a big deal about the major contributors for something, do you think that could have a negative impact on what people feel about contributing, that it's about getting kudos rather than contributing?
Potentially. I mean, I think, so what I do in my projects is if someone submits even a one-line like typo fix, I add them to the authors file. And I think that does two things. One, it makes those people that did a small change feel like it was insignificant, or they might even be bothering the maintainer. It makes them feel, really like they did a good thing, which they did. And I feel like the larger that file is, the less important that recognition would be, kind of, in a way, where, if you have 100 people in the file, that's a lot different than having 4. I feel like that makes it a lot less intimidating as well. And that's kind of the path that I go down. But if you're a project like Django, I mean, if you just did if you had an authors file for every single line change, it would be ridiculous. So I don't know. I think it really depends on the project and the maintainer. Anybody else?
Questions?
Anything at all? All right.
Thank you very much, Kenneth Rice.
Thank you.